All right, so usually I like to start a video with a little background, tell you where we're headed, but you saw that thumbnail. We got to dive right in to what you're seeing there. So I'm going to pull up a couple pictures here of this group. Ever since I've seen these pictures, I have wanted to cover this organization to learn more about it and to kind of share what's going on in West Papua. So thank you to Uday for putting together this research so we can actually get into this subject a little bit. Now, the fighters that you're seeing here are a part of the West Papua National Liberation Army, otherwise known as TPNPB. It's a part of an insurgent movement, if you will, essentially fighting for independence from Indonesia in, you guessed it, West Papua. Now, the insurgency in West Papua continues to intensify, with 79 people killed in 2023, which is a 49% increase year over year and an 80% increase since 2021, which is a trend that will likely continue as these insurgent forces continue to gain strength, while Jakarta in Indonesia, which officially owns this area and governs this area, continues to pursue tactics that have been largely unsuccessful to date. All right, so the TPNPB is an armed separatist group calling for independence from Indonesia. It's made up of quite a few different subgroups of varying capabilities that act relatively independent of one another, kind of tied to their respective geographic locations in West Papua. Now, the group was formed out of previous separatist groups and elements in 2012, and while pretty sporadic at first, they've been increasingly active since 2018. And since then, they've been targeting a wide range of targets all across West Papua, including schools, government buildings, businesses, infrastructure, security forces, police and military, as well as civilians. They've also gained a pretty significant amount of capability through increased funding, access to weaponry, and stepping up the tempo of attacks. We're going to get into each one of those in a moment. There has been some commentary that as younger generations join the organization, they bring with it a little more extremism, more of a willingness to commit violence. For example, Igianis Kogoya, who's 24 years old now, has risen to lead the most active TPNPB subgroup in the region. And his subgroup specifically has been responsible for some of the most notable attacks since 2018. Again, the leader of this subgroup is only 24 years old. So I think it might be kind of easy to look at these guys from the West Papua National Liberation Army and mock them, kind of what they're wearing in their kit and their loadout and all that. I mean, they've gotten weapons from like 30 different countries spanning the last 100 plus years, machetes, spears, bows and arrows, bunch of different types of camo or no camo at all. It's a ragtag looking group, but I'll tell you what, I would not want to run up against these guys on their home turf. They are pretty intimidating. So I'll leave these pictures up for a bit and kind of cycle through them throughout the video, just because I know a lot of you are really, really good at identifying kind of the obscure makes and models of some of these weapons, as well as the kind of era and country that some of this military surplus camo comes from. I'm not. I don't have a good eye for that. I did see some of this stuff available on Venture Surplus, like the gloves with the hard plastic knuckles, and then the woodland pattern BDUs. The West Papuan guys, they cut theirs off, right? They turn it into vests, turn it into shorts. I don't think they sell them like that at Venture Surplus, but who knows? Maybe send them one of these pictures. Tell them this is what you're trying to put together. Use code Preston10, get 10% off that order. Worth a shot. So looking at some of the more recent attacks, on October 16th, the West Papua National Liberation Army killed around 13 gold miners in Yahukimo District in Highlands, Papua. The TPNPB claimed that those miners were Jakarta spies. This follows an increasing pattern of the TPNPB killing non-Papuan Indonesians, claiming that they work with security forces. Not unusual for insurgent forces to be so nervous about that, right? Anybody comes into the area, they often think that they're associated with government forces trying to spy. They say this is the highest casualty attack, this attack in October, since December 2018, when the TPNPB's, again, Egianis Kogayu, directed the killing of at least 19 non-Papuan Indonesian workers. Then in April, the TPNPB claimed that they had killed at least 9 Indonesian soldiers that were involved in a mission to rescue a kidnapped foreigner. The Indonesian military initially denied those claims, saying that one soldier had died, but it's because he fell into a ravine. So, I don't know what you guys are talking about. But eventually, over time, more and more news came out, and what it looks like now is that at least 6 soldiers were killed during that engagement. The TPNPB has also been attacking airlines, kind of one of the main ways for anybody to travel across West Papua, given the challenging terrain there, as well as other government infrastructure, government offices. They have been targeting resource projects like gold mining and timber, which is one of the ways that the insurgent organization has been able to fund their activities. In fact, one of their spokesperson, if you will, said earlier, quote, "We can only make money through mining and timber." This was said by Sebi Sambam earlier this year. Of course, that's not the only way that the TPNPB makes money. They also levy what they call revolutionary taxes, or extortion is another way to call that, especially on funds provided by the Indonesian government to aid in village development and other local projects. In fact, in 2023, there was $337 million earmarked for West Papua. However, much of that is believed to have been lost due to corruption and extortion by the TPNPB. Now, I mentioned earlier how the organization is growing in capabilities. One of the ways that they're doing that is with the indirect help of the Indonesian government, their direct adversary. So corruption is what we're getting at here. So the Indonesian military announced in May a crackdown on soldiers and security forces who were found to be illegally selling government-issued firearms and ammunitions to the TPNPB, which is one of the major sources of armament for the insurgent organization. They also conduct raids on government entities, police, military outposts. But, they've been able to, for the most part, just kind of buy things directly from corrupt government officials whenever they want. Now, primarily, the TPNPB is focused on independence from Indonesia, but over the last few years, they've really picked up attacks and threats against non-Papuan Indonesians, Papuans, and foreigners. For instance, this past February, the TPNPB subgroup led by Egyanis Kagayu kidnapped a New Zealand citizen named Philip Mertens, who was working as a pilot for a local airline. He is now, still held since February, the longest held captive in the West Papuan insurgency. Prior to this, there was a kidnapping of 11 World Wildlife Fund researchers in 1996. They were held for 5 months, which was the longest hostage situation prior to Mertens, which is now, coming up on a year. Then in 2020, the TPNPB killed a New Zealand citizen working in the Freeport mining area. The Freeport mine, for reference, is one of the world's largest gold and copper mines. So big, you can actually see the thing from space. So to many Papuans, it's kind of a symbol of resource colonialism, and most don't see the benefits of that actually making its way into the Papuan provinces. A lot of it is extracted to international organizations. Papuan separatists, in turn, like the TPNPB, have often targeted Freeport and entities operating in the area. The TPNPB also continues to kill Indonesians who come to Papua for work, usually in the service sector. Things like education, taxi drivers, construction workers, obviously a lot in the gold mines. The total number of Indonesians killed, civilians killed in Papua has been rising quite a bit in the last few years. But the TPNPB almost always refers to these civilians as Indonesian spies, something we talked about previously. And then the TPNPB is also targeting indigenous Papuans. In August, they killed a Papuan social worker, accusing her of being a spy. They've since issued more threats, saying they wouldn't hesitate to kill more Papuans working with the Indonesian government. Of course, there's no evidence that that person they killed was actually a spy, which is kind of in stark contrast to a killing of an indigenous Papuan police officer in 2022, for which the group expressed regret. Didn't say anything about being a spy. They just said they needed access to her and other weapons. So as is the case with any insurgency, they're not operating alone, right? There's other actors involved here. You've got the Indonesian government, security forces, kind of the other side, the ones trying to put down this insurgency. It's primarily made up of Indonesian military and police, which for the most part, really using a broad brushstroke here, they lack resolve. They tend to use disproportionate force when they do get engaged with rebel forces and are corrupt. Right, we just talked a minute ago about how many weapons and ammunition they're selling directly to the insurgent forces. It makes it very hard for Jakarta to affect any sort of security situation in West Papua. Additionally, the security apparatus from Indonesia has profited quite a bit. There's a lot of people in that organization that have done very, very well from both legal and illegal business activities in West Papua. And the Indonesian security forces have been accused of human rights violations and a lot of criminal activity. I mean, in 2022, 6 Indonesian soldiers were arrested for killing and mutilating the bodies of 4 Papuans that they lured in on a fake weapons deal. Then, of course, you've got the civilian population. Just like in any insurgency, some support the TPNPB, others condemn them for their violence. But there are still some pro-independence movements in West Papua, not necessarily united, but they do their best to try to raise awareness and speak out for Papuan rights. And some of these groups have been pretty integral in organizing major protests that have come up in recent years. In 2019, for instance, the largest anti-racism protest took place across West Papua and other parts of Indonesia following a pretty significant event at a Papuan student dormitory in Java. At that event, Indonesian nationalists, with police standing by and not interfering, attacked Papuan students, setting off a wave of protests that resulted in the deaths of dozens of people, mostly Papuans, over the following month, which was mainly due to security forces using indiscriminate and overbearing force against protesters who were, for the most part, trying to remain peaceful. Again, talking about some of the challenges within the Indonesian security apparatus. Then stepping back, kind of big picture where all this is coming from, Indonesia was colonized by the Dutch and New Guinea was divided by them, the British and German colonial powers. Once Indonesia gained independence, the Dutch still administered Western New Guinea, or West Papua. Then in the 1960s, Indonesia annexed and took control of West Papua. Following Indonesia's annexation, Jakarta has and continues to implement a pretty hardcore security strategy, trying to deal with issues arising from the controversial annexation, which has resulted, not surprisingly, in allegations of genocide and various human rights abuses. Now, armed insurgency against Indonesia kind of started in the late 1960s, early 1970s, but the incidents were kind of rare and more sporadic at that time. At that point, they were led by the Free Papuan Movement, or the OPM, out of which came the more extreme TPNPB. And then in terms of external influence on the insurgency, not a lot. Seems like for the most part, countries are just kind of let it happen. Let Indonesia figure out their thing. I mean, Australia and New Zealand are right there. Doesn't seem like it's really on their radar. They're certainly aware of what's going on. They don't seem to be playing any significant role one way or the other. There are some refugee organizations in both Australia and New Zealand that are speaking out and trying to raise money for the TPNPB. There's also no evidence at this point. You see any insurgent organization, you think they got to be linked up with somebody, right? The U.S. or China or Russia or somebody's probably funneling money and weapons. It doesn't look like it. From all the evidence that's come out, it doesn't look like the TPNPB is receiving, at this point at least, any external funding. So as of now, it looks like the insurgency will continue to get more violent as the Indonesian economy and Jakarta's resolve to control Papua grows. Jakarta will likely seek to project that the situation is safe despite the growing number of civilians and security forces killed in the past few years. And given Indonesia's history of pretty brutal ethnic violence, racism, and other factors, this could result in a harsher crackdown and further entrench cycles of violence, which could eventually lead the TPNPB to become even more extremist in its views and tactics. But that's all I got for now. Thank you again to Uday Bakshi for putting together the research on this piece. You can find more of Uday's work at the link in the description below. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.